All right, looking at Exodus. Let's see if I can find it. 5. Exodus 5 is where we're going to be at right now. Exodus 5. Okay, Exodus 5, verse 1. What we're looking at now, we went over this already when we first started our study, and we are actually in the 18th dynasty of the Exodus. There's 31 dynasties in Egypt. Okay, so the Exodus makes up the 18th dynasty, which is considered the greatest dynasty that Egypt had. This is the dynasty that presented to us the 18-year-old Pharaoh, King Tut. He was the yes.
Do the dynasties count down?
Yes, they count. No, they count up. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but your dates count backwards. You start at Dynasty 1, but in BC you always count your date backwards.
So the 31st dynasty would be year 0 then?
It's ended in around 40 BC, 40 or 80 BC. That's when, of course, that's when you have your Alexander the Great and all that. But the dynasties count from 1 to 31, but your dates run backwards. So if you ever studied the Old Testament, your dates always run backwards, okay? So we're dealing with the 18th dynasty. Amenhotep II, he began to reign at the age of 18. So when you're studying Moses, the Exodus Moses, you're dealing with this Pharaoh right here, okay? This is when he reigned from 1425 to 1398. These was his dates of reigning. He was the 7th Pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. Sometime look up the dynasties and you can kind of do some research. All of these guys, the majority of them have been found in the Valley of the Kings. They're still trying to unearth some of the pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings. He was discovered, I believe, in 1868, along with 6 more pharaohs. And most pharaohs, when they were buried in 2 or 3 coffins. They'd put a coffin in one, and then put another one in one, and another one in one. He's the only one that had a single coffin when they buried him. So you're dealing with, this is the guy right here. 7th Pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. There's 31. Now, a lot of people think, when you think of Egypt, what is the architecture or the structure that you always think of? Pyramids. Those was built during the 4th dynasty, during 2613 to 2498. The Israelites did not build these. These was not built by the Israelites. These was built in the 14th and the 4th dynasty. And the Israelites, you actually deal with Joshua through Moses. You deal with them from the 12th dynasty up to the 18th dynasty. So when you study Joshua at the end of Genesis, the last verse in Genesis, which is 50:26, it says, "So Joseph died, being 110 years old." Now remember, they had already been in Egypt by then. Remember, Joseph moves, and they move all of his family into Goshen. Everybody should know that story, okay? And they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt, okay? So when you're dealing with that verse, you're to the 12th dynasty of Egypt. And this runs from 12th to the 18th dynasty, all right? So we know that they was in bondage some 430 some odd years, all right? Now, you have to give or take a few, because if you study this, you will get different dates. Nobody agrees on anything. The dates are usually, if you have 10 guys that are examining these tombs and examining these artifacts and things like that, and the pictures that they paint on the wall, if you got 10 guys, they will differ for about 50 years. They would give you 50 years, give or take. All right? So if the 12th dynasty started in 1991, the year I graduated high school, it ran from the time Amenhotep II. We know that Moses was during this time. Okay? So if you got 1991, starting the 12th dynasty, and let's just ballpark it at 1412, okay, is when the Exodus started, when they left. Because you remember, you count down in BC. It's going to give you, 500 and some odd years? So you have to differentiate 50 years, give or take. So you're about right in the ballpark of these dates. You're not off. If you're going to be off, you're going to be off 50 to 100 years, which is, when you're dealing with this, that's not too bad. Okay? So we know, from the 12th dynasty to the 18th dynasty is when all the Israelites started their building. Now, we often think, they built the pyramids. They did not build the pyramids. That was in the 4th dynasty. And they have only actually found 3 pyramids. The largest pyramid, just to kind of tell you the kind of architecture these guys could do. The Great Pyramid, the one that we're so familiar with, that gigantic one that has kind of the top that's kind of eroded off. The base of that pyramid is about 750 feet, just the base of it. And it goes, the original height was 490 feet. So if you're going 490 feet, remember, scaffolding back then, I don't believe they had much of it. They didn't have harnesses that you could clamp onto if somebody was to fall. So the 4th dynasty is when the pyramids began. Now, what did the children of Israel build between the 12th dynasty and the 18th dynasty? The majority of what they did was they would either they would do expansion projects to temples, and they would build statues. If they had a temple dedicated to Ra, the sun god, they could expand his temple. So that was basically what they would do. They would also build cities, massive cities. So they would either build cities or they would do expansion projects on temples and things like that. But when this guy, I got some books at home from when I had to study some of this, and it's really interesting, and I made some copies, how they found him. He was found in 1898, all right? This is when he was found. And he is actually in a museum. This guy is in a museum in Cairo. And you can go by and you can see him and say hello. All right? He is in Cairo. And this is what this is Victor Loret. He is the one that actually discovered him in the Valley of the Kings. Okay? And I think he is in KC 85 is the area where he was found at. So we know by studying the Egyptian history and things like that the Exodus happened. We believe it happened. If you look in any record of Egypt, there's no mention of it. If you look in any statue, any stone carvings or anything, it's almost like Exodus never happened. And we discussed once when we started this that if a pharaoh had his approval ratings wasn't high, they kind of covered that part of history up and kind of ignored it because their pharaohs were gods. You did not get no higher than the pharaohs. So the reason they think that there is no evidence of this individual having an ordeal with Moses is because of what God brought. So the scribes and those guys was basically like, we're not going to record any of this. Let's just kind of keep it hush-hush and it'll go away. All right, that was before Facebook and Instagram and all that. All right, if it was on Facebook, we'd be blowing up about this guy. Okay, all right. Now he was found. This is to kind of give you some information on this individual. He stood 6 foot tall, which this individual says. Victor Loret said this, and I'm quoting him. The king had been tall for his times and stood 6 foot, much taller than his father or his son. His body, now remember this is written back in the 1800s, his body is that of a robust, strongly built individual. At the time of the ruler's death, his hair was graying and he had developed a bald spot on the back of his head. This is him. when they buried him. This is how they think he looked when they buried him. Here's another. Now this is interesting. The body of Amenhotep II was covered with raised nodules all over his body, nodules, which an archaeologist claimed that he had died from some type of disease. So all over, they said, and I got a picture of it, from his neck all the way down, there was raised everywhere under his skin. Yeah. See, go ahead. See, you was wanting to say it, but you can't overrule her because she, yeah.
My uncle has that.
Okay, what? Say it again.
Neurofibromatosis, I think, or yeah, fibromatosis. Yes.
All right. They said that this individual had that. Okay. So that is just some kind of information about him. He was buried. The only thing that they found buried with him was a large bow that had been broken in two.
Boat or bow?
Bow, which had been broken in two, which means that when his reign ended, he either died in war or he was overthrown by someone. So I thought that was kind of interesting about this individual. So when we are studying Egypt and Moses leaving Egypt, this is the guy that you're studying about. That guy right there. It is not Yul Brynner, bald-headed, but this is him. At 18 years old, not president of Beta Club or Geraldine School. He is the ruler of the nation of all nations. He is considered a god. And you have to remember, when Moses goes back to Egypt, he is very familiar with their techniques. Moses knows. Now you have to understand, the people in Egypt, they honestly think he's God. When they died, that is why they buried him with so much goods and riches, so they would have other stuff when they crossed over to another life, so they would already be prepared. So he was considered a god. He did not have the last say so. He had the only say so. Nobody questioned him. So it's amazing that when Moses goes back, only but by the grace of God, Moses is not this individual. If God hadn't have taken him out, Moses would have been here. But Moses knows that this individual is just a man, flesh and blood. That's all he is. Okay? And so that's who you're dealing with when we're dealing with this guy. All right? He died just like any other man, and he had that disease, whatever you say he had. All right? Fibromyalgia, whatever. I don't know what it's called. So that's what he's got. His name actually means satisfied. So there you have it. From Joseph, 1991, up until Moses. And if we say that Moses began his exodus halfway between his reign, then you're pretty much hitting the nail on the head when you're dealing with these dates. Okay, so these are the dates and things like that. All right. Now he is going to ask something that is very important, a question. All right, and we're going to look at that question. We're going to try to answer it. All right, make sure I've got all my stuff. This was what I worked on this week. Okay? Now, and afterwards Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh. This is neat. How, if you're dealing with a god, little g, how could Moses and Aaron just waltz right in there and just talk to him? He thought about that. It's not like walking. I mean, if you think trying to get with the president's hard, deal with somebody that they think's God. Okay? Moses was pretty well known still. People knew who he was. So he walks in and he confronts this individual. All right? And afterward Moses, and what is neat, and this has always been interesting to me, this guy could have had Moses killed anytime he wanted to. The first time that he walked in, he could have had Moses' head cut plumb off, and Aaron's. In actuality, Exodus chapter 5, verse 1, and really that could have been it. When Moses and Aaron walks in and talk to him, he could have had them killed. Because Moses speaks to him pretty rough. Really rough. It's almost like when Nathan goes and speaks to David after the sin of Bathsheba. And it says, and afterward Moses and Aaron went in and told him, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go that they may hold a feast or a sacrifice in the wilderness. That is the one thing that God would honor during the Old Testament was a sacrifice. That is the one thing that God wanted was sacrifices unto Him. First time that these people have ever probably had an opportunity, they're not going to get an opportunity, to go and sacrifice unto God. Let my people go. That is the famous saying. We always say, that is it. Let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. Moses once walked the same hallways this guy walked. They was, at one time, they was identical. Now they're polar opposites. And pharaohs in the Old Testament in Egypt always is representative of the world or the devil. All right? So whenever you study the pharaohs, they're always in the Old Testament, they are always representative or symbolic of Satan. What has Satan always tried to get to do? To destroy the gospel, to destroy Jesus, to destroy God, to destroy the message, to destroy salvation. What did the Pharaoh try to do? He tried to destroy all the little babies. And then Herod, of course, is a type of Satan. What did he try to do? Tried to destroy the gospel. And you're not going to destroy this. You're not going to destroy the gospel. You're not going to destroy salvation. And it says, let my people go that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. He's in Egypt. He is in this country. They've had to walk from Midian to get here. And this is what Pharaoh said. Now, it's always interesting to me that we focus so much on let my people go, but we overlook verse 2. Who is the Lord? To me, that's a more important statement than let my people go. Who is the Lord? We don't focus on that. Who is another person that actually said that also? Pilate said to Jesus, what is truth? Jesus Christ says, I am what? The way and the life. So basically what Pontius Pilate was saying is, who is the Lord? What is truth? Pilate, representative, or is a type of the devil also. So Moses is standing before this individual. He's probably going to be about, let's just say he's 30 years old at the time. I don't know. He's 30. Got an 80-year-old man coming up. All right? And he says, let my people go. And this Pharaoh looks at him and says, who is the Lord? Okay? That I should obey his voice and let Israel go. Very arrogant. This is also sad. The fool has said in his heart that there is no God, right?
Amen.
I know not the Lord, neither will I let Israel go. Pretty blunt, isn't it? If that would have been Moses, would have been like, okay, going back to Midian. Hey, I tried. Went in there and argued my case before Pharaoh, and he said no, so we're going to go back. Now, who hardens Pharaoh's heart? God is hardening Pharaoh's heart. So we see God's sovereignty working in verse 2. Who is the Lord? And that is a question that is still answered today, that is still asked today. You notice that they want to go into the wilderness and stay 3 days. In verse 3, they just want to go 3 days. If you study numerology, 3 is a type of divine completeness. Jonah was in the belly of the fish. Jesus was in the tomb.
3 days.
All right, so Pharaoh's the type of Satan, and he was defeated by Jesus, who was in the tomb for 3 days, who entered into the holies of holies. What was Jesus Christ doing in that 3 days? And during that 3 days, Jesus Christ went down into paradise and preached, and then he brought those out of paradise, and then he went up into the holies of holies, which is in heaven, offered his blood before God, defeating Satan and becoming the ultimate sacrifice. And what does the children of Israel want to go do? Make a sacrifice. So you can see now how the Old and New Testament is starting to weave itself together again. Hebrews chapter 9 explains it all. If you ever get a chance, study Hebrews chapter 9 about Jesus Christ entering. It says in Hebrews chapter 9 verse 24, it says, "For Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands." And the holy places made with hands is something we're going to be studying about a few months from now, which is the tabernacle of Moses. And we'll have all the diagrams and all that kind of stuff for you guys. And I'll make sure to pass them out so you can have one. But it says, "For Christ entered not into the holy place made with hands," which is a type of the Moses tabernacle, and also the type of Solomon's temple, and also a type of Herod's temple. Okay? Which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself. What was Jesus Christ doing the 3 days when he was in the grave? He was not lying there. He was at one time during those 3 days, he had entered into heaven itself, and he appeared into the presence of God for who? Us, you and I. And he offered himself upon the one time. Okay? Amazing to me, that's what Jesus Christ did for us. You know, we think that just buried and rolled a stone away, that he was not. He went down and preached in paradise, and he also delivered those people out. And then he went up into heaven, offered himself before Christ into a tabernacle which is not made with hands. That is what Jesus Christ did, and he did it for us. Amazing. Always amazes me just to read that. So what the Pharaoh says is, who is the Lord? All right? Let's you and I find out. And we went through this, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. We went over that. But we really didn't get into a whole lot of verses. Let's look. I'll read these off if I can find them really quick. In Nahum chapter 1 verse 2, this tells us who the Lord is. Nahum, which is, if you find Matthew, go back 2 or 3 books and it's there. Okay? This is 150 years after Jonah. This is when God destroys Nineveh. Okay? And this is what Nahum describes God as. So Pharaoh wants to know who is the Lord. How do we find out who the Lord is? Go to the source, which is Scripture. Okay? This is Nahum. God is jealous, and the Lord revenges. The Lord is revenges and is furious, and the Lord will take vengeance upon his adversaries and reserveth wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord hath his way. That's one description of God. Job. Let me see if I can find it. Job. This is my favorite. Job 38, 1 and 8. This is who God describes himself as. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, remember Pharaoh said, who is the Lord? Okay? Who is this? Remember, a man is asking Moses who God is, and now God is asking man who he is. All right? Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? We looked in Proverbs, what is the beginning of knowledge? Fear of the Lord. Who is this that darketh counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man, and I would demand, not ask, I would demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? He's asking Job this. Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof? Verse 6, who hath laid the cornerstone? Verse 8, who hath shut up the seal with the doors when it break forth as it has issued out of the womb? Verse 18, who hath perceived the breath of the earth? Declare if thou knowest at all. Wow. Who's God? He was there, but he's the one that laid the foundations of the earth. Isaiah 40. Pharaoh's asking Moses, who's God? Well, we're going to look and see who he is. Isaiah 40. These are some of my favorites also. Isaiah 40, I like these. These are really neat, especially in the time we're living today. Isaiah 40, verse 12. This is God describing who he is. Who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hands? The earth. Okay? Have you got all this, Paul? Has everybody got this written down? Let's say this is the earth. God holds every bit of that between pinky and thumb. in his hand. All right? Between this and this is where God's got the world, right here. And he's asking, he says in verse 12, who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and had meted out heaven in the span, and comprehended the dust that's on the earth in a measure? God knows every speck of dust that's on the earth. Okay? Every speck of dust. Do you know what God made man out of? Dust. All right? Dust, where am I at? Of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales. I was watching a documentary the other night on these guys that scale Everest, the peak of the world, the greatest mountain ever. And we got mere mortal men, like what God was asking Job, where was you at? And I laid the foundation of the earth. And he's telling Isaiah, in my hand, just in my hand, the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Mediterranean, Sea of Japan, the Dead Sea, all that water is right here for me. It's like when you go outside and it rains. Next time you go outside and it rains, hold your hand out. And when a drop of water hits your hand, just imagine that's what the drop of water, that's what the oceans looks like in the hand of God. That's who we worship. Amen. It's not a puny God that's like us or just a little bigger. That's who we worship. A God that has that. Wow, that is absolutely amazing. But I was studying that documentary, mere men, that is, have to have these oxygen masks just to get on, just to get halfway up Everest. And God says, I can take that mountain, put it in the scale, and balance it. Amazing. All right. Look at verse 15 of Isaiah 40. Behold the nations. This is great. Is our country, is our world in turmoil? Yes. All right? And behold, the nations are as a drop of a bucket. Next time you go out, and if you got to feed chickens or feed cats or something, and you put their water or something in the bucket to pour it out in their water dish, just imagine that first drop in that bucket. That's how God sees nations. In America, we're the greatest nation in the world. We think we're powerful and almighty, but to God, we're a drop in a bucket. So who's in control? Absolutely God. We worship Him. And look at this. This is amazing. Not only are the nations a drop in a bucket, and they are counted as the small dust. Not the big dust, the teeny dust. That's what a nation is to God. And he also says, I think somewhere he uses the earth as a footstool. A footstool. This is who we pray to. This is who we worship. Behold, he hath taken up the isles as a very little thing. All the islands. Every island that is in the world. He says, I can take them up, and it's really not a big deal for me to pick them up. Okay, let's keep going. Who is God? This is Him. In Lebanon, which is where the cedars came from to build Solomon's temple, to build Herod's temple, these are considered the greatest wood, the greatest timber that has ever been known to man. And when they would burn sacrifices to God, they would just kind of gather up the timber that was around. But God says even the timbers of Lebanon are not sufficient. Your greatest wood, which is the timbers of Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon, it's not even sufficient for me. When you burn them, it's not even sufficient. Nor the beast thereof sufficient for a burnt offering. Do you know what is sufficient? What? Christ. That's what's sufficient. Verse 17. All right? Republican, Democrat, I don't care, Hillary, Trump, whatever. They get on Fox, they get on CNN, they talk about how great they are, how great they are, how great they are. This is God. All nations before Him are as nothing. Okay? And they are counted to Him less than nothing in vanity. The nations in front of God are nothing. But yet Jesus Christ goes into the holies of holies for who? Us. This individual that's in verses 15, 16, and 17 and 18 is the same individual that goes into the holies of holies one time. The holies of holies that are not made with hand and offered His blood upon a sacrifice for you and I. So if somebody does something good for you, it's nice. Just imagine what God done for us. This God that in his hand, he's got everything right there. Okay? Let's go into another one. To whom, verse 18, then will ye liken God? To whom? What person is like God? Nobody. I mean, absolutely nobody is like God. Or what likeness will you compare unto him? Nothing. Who is like God? Nobody. I mean, Moses couldn't even he had to look at his hindsight. And when he came down off the mountain, he had such a glow they had to put a veil over his face. Who is like God? Absolutely no. Look in verse 23. That brings the princes to nothing. He maketh the judges of the earth as vanity. In Hebrew, that means worthless. All right? And this is who we serve. Verse 26, lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things that bringeth out their host by number. He calleth them. This is, you know what the host is? You look at them every night when you go outside, it's the stars. Okay? Scientists say there's billions of stars. One star could swallow up the earth 10 times. One star. All right? One star can swallow up the earth. There's billions of them, and the writer says, lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things, that bringeth out their host by number. He calleth them all by name. Billions upon billions upon billions of stars, God knows all of them by name. By the greatness of his might, for that he is strong in power, no one faileth. Wow. Pretty big God, isn't he? He is. There's not even a word to describe just how amazing he is. I mean, just in those few verses, that's who Pharaoh's dealing with. The guy that's got nodules wants to know who God is. That's who God is. When you get on your hands and knees at night and you pray to God, that's who you're praying to. When you get up in the morning and your feet hit the ground, it's not because of anything else except to God that looks at the nations as nothing. When a prince or a judge stands in front of him, and this is what is the highest court in the land? The Supreme Court. The laws they lay down, you cannot overrule them. But in the eyes of God, they're vanity, they're empty. Those guys. And that's my God. That's who I serve, okay? Isaiah 41:4. Who hath wrought and done it? Calling the generations from the beginning, I, the Lord, the first, and with the last, I am he. From the very beginning, in actuality, if you study Genesis, there's no really the beginning. The only beginning you have in Genesis is when God started creating, but God was before then. So before Genesis 1:1 was God, he says, I am he. 2016, he's still I am he. Revelations 1:8. He has described himself pretty well so far, hasn't he? This is who God is. Let me see if I can find it. I'm sorry, 1:11. 1:11. It says, I am the Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. That's who God is. Beginning and end. And everything in the middle, that's God. Let me see. Jesus Christ tells Mary and Martha, I am the resurrection. So, you think Pharaoh's going to find out pretty quick who God is? He's going to find out real quick. But God's going to harden his heart. All right? So maybe, I hope them verses help you guys. I'll give you a challenge. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, before you even start your day, think, okay, the God that's watching over my life and the God that I'm serving is the God that is described in Isaiah is amazing. That's who we're serving. Okay? Pharaoh says, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? He is going to be dead wrong on that. Dead wrong. Because after everything is said and done, he is begging the children of Israel, leave. Please go away. I don't want you around. Go away. All right? And he also says, I won't let Israel go. Wrong. He's going to let them go. You know why? Because he's going to be dealing with the God, that nation, the throne that he sits upon, that nation to God is just a drop in a bucket. That's who he's dealing with. And that's who Moses is going to represent. Verse 3, and they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Let us go, we pray thee, 3 days, divine completion, into the desert, and sacrifice unto the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. Okay? What's interesting about those plagues is that the first 2 or 3, I believe, actually affect the children of Israel also in Goshen. I think it's when they get to the cattle. I could be wrong. I think it's when the plagues get to the cattle and he wipes out all the cattle, that the cattle in Goshen that belong to the children of Israel are not affected. I think that's the way it goes. And the king of Egypt said unto them, verse 4, we're fixing to wrap her up. Wherefore do you, Moses and Aaron, let the people from their works? Get ye into your burdens. All right, I'm going to read that again. Get you unto your burdens. When we watch that movie, 10 Commandments, who's the only 2 people that don't ever do no work? Moses and Aaron. But in verse 4, guess who's right in there making bricks with them? Moses. He don't go there and kind of lollygag around, wait for a plague to come. Then he goes out and says, hey, let my people go. I'm going back to the house. He's in the thick with the children of Israel. Okay? And Pharaoh said, you guys are never going to watch. I bought that movie the other night at Walmart for $5. I told Chris I'm going to watch it, point out all the mistakes they made. And then Pharaoh said, behold the people. And this is something, it echoes the very first chapter. And Pharaoh said, behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them rest from their burdens. And Pharaoh commanded the same day the taskmasters of their people. You can see how Pharaoh was polar opposite of God. What did God do on the 7th day? What does Pharaoh do? None. Don't rest. You go. Work. Okay? And Pharaoh commanded the same day the taskmasters of the people and to their officers, saying, all right, ye shall no more give the people straw to make brick. And they would take mud and they would take straw and they'd make the bricks. And they'd have this little form. It was a piece of wood. And they would put their mud and their straw in there, and they'd sit it out in the sun for 7 days. And that's how they would make their brick. And they would have fields just dedicated for the brick straw. That's the only thing they would grow the straw for was for the brick. Same brick that built the pyramids and things like that. Okay. And you shall no more give the people straw to make their brick, as heretofore let them go and gather straw for themselves. All right? Pharaoh makes the people work even harder and harder and harder and harder. He keeps adding to their burden. Who was the religious elite in the New Testament that kept adding to the children of Israel's burden? The Pharisees. Remember, they had those laws, and they just had law upon law upon law upon law. Same thing. Nothing changed from the Old Testament to the New Testament when it comes to, All right, now. And we're going to end in verse 8. In the tally of the bricks which you did make heretofore, you shall lay upon them. You shall not diminish aught thereof, for they be idle. Therefore they cry, saying, let us go and sacrifice unto God. He's mocking them. Okay, he's mocking Moses, and he's mocking the children of Israel, and he's mocking God. Verse 9, let their more work be laid upon them, that they may labor therein, and let them not regard vain words. He is describing what Moses said as vain, empty, dead. The average Hebrew during this time could make between 1,000 and 1,500 bricks a day. Okay? And now, in verse 11, look at verse 10. And the taskmasters of the people went out, and their officers, and spake to the people, saying, thus said the Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go ye, get your straw where you can find it. You not aught of your work shall be diminished. So the people were scattered abroad throughout all of Egypt. All right? All of Egypt to gather, not straw, not the stuff that grows. They was getting the stubble, the leftovers. Now, this is interesting. What happened to the straw? They're just getting stubble. Where did the straw go? Guess who destroyed the straw? Pharaoh. He's kind of a meanie, ain't he? So instead of the straw, Pharaoh goes out and destroys all the straw and leaves them stubble. Let's just say that you're living during this time. You've got a wife, 10 kids. Ain't no school for them. Ain't no sitting at home. Ain't no PlayStation, Nintendos, whatever. You get your kid up in the morning and they go out and they start gathering stubble for brick. You know what happens if they don't get their quota? They're dead. That's the type of environment that this takes place in. You got a Pharaoh that goes out. All right, you got to go get your straw. But guess what? There's not going to be any out there. You're going to have to get in there. You're going to have to find the scraps. And your brick between 1,000 and 1,500. That's your kids too. They got to make that also. It's not mom and dad. Kids got to make it too. I can see Christopher and Dan Lynn. After about a brick and a half, Dan Lynn would be squalling, and Christopher would be, I'm tired. All right. So if they didn't want to make their tally a brick, guess who had to make it up for them? Mom and dad. And you wonder why, I'm going to stop here, and you wonder why